The HOA board president was already shouting into her phone when Uncle Ray stepped out of the garage with a garden spade in one hand and a cup of black coffee in the other. I don't care what time it is, this man is refusing to leave the property. He claims he's helping his niece, but we've warned him twice. Send someone now. The two junior board members stood stiff behind her, arms crossed, trying to look authoritative. The scene would have been comical if it hadn't been unfolding in Lena Carver's front yard in front of half the block on a Saturday morning. Uncle Ray blinked, looked down at his flannel sleeves, then at the flower bed he'd been digging. "You're calling the police?" he asked, calmly. The woman, Cheryl Dunlap, president of the Oak Hollow Estates HOA, didn't even look at him when she hissed into the phone again. Yes, that's right. He's interfering with regulated grounds. He became aggressive when we confronted him. This is a safety issue now." Lena came down the porch steps fast, hair tied back, holding a garden tag and a pair of gloves. "Aggressive? Are you kidding? He was planting zinnias on restricted turf," Cheryl snapped. "Your lease agreement clearly states no modifications to the front perimeter without HOA approval." "It's not a modification," Lena shot back. "It's a seasonal plant bed. The same one I've redone every spring since I moved in." Uncle Ray took a sip from his mug and leaned casually on the spade. The quiet confidence in his posture wasn't arrogance, it was experience. But the HOA team didn't recognize that. All they saw was a tall man with calloused hands and a no-nonsense face who didn't flinch when threatened. "You really want to escalate this over a flower bed?" he asked. Cheryl stepped forward like she was announcing a verdict. "This neighborhood has rules. We enforce them equally. If we allow this kind of personal landscaping, next thing you know we'll have flamingos and fruit trees everywhere." "I like fruit trees," Ray muttered. "You're trespassing, sir. She's my niece." "That doesn't matter." A few more neighbors had gathered now, some with phones, some with strollers. A few whispered. One man across the street recorded quietly while pretending to check his mailbox. Cheryl raised her voice. "You were asked to leave. You refused. We've contacted the sheriff's office." That was when Uncle Ray finally smiled. Not a smirk, not mocking, just a quiet, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You called the sheriff?" "Yes," she said, triumphant. "And they're sending a unit." "Well, that's going to be awkward." Lena glanced up at her uncle and squinted. "Ray, you didn't." He didn't answer her. Because a black SUV had just pulled onto the street. It wasn't a squad car. No lights, no sirens, just clean tinted windows, dark chrome rims, and the unmistakable presence of command. The back door opened before the car even fully stopped. A uniformed deputy stepped out, scanned the crowd, then turned back toward the vehicle. A second figure emerged, broad-shouldered, mid-50s, wearing the clean navy uniform of a senior law enforcement officer, and on his badge, Chief Raymond Carver. You could hear Cheryl's breath catch from 6 feet away. Ray didn't say a word. He just walked toward the SUV and nodded at his colleague. "Thanks for making the drive, Anthony. Didn't realize I'd be responding to your arrest," the deputy muttered with a half grin. "Yeah, well, seems my niece's flower bed is now considered a felony." The crowd didn't laugh, but they didn't move either. They just watched as Chief Carver pulled a printed copy of the Oak Hollow HOA bylaws from his back pocket and unfolded it slowly. "I took the liberty of reviewing your turf policies last night," he said, looking straight at Cheryl. "Since you sent Lena 2 pre-violation alerts about her paint color last spring. That's internal board policy," Cheryl managed, her voice tight. "So is the clause that says enforcement stops when it puts a resident in danger, or when the situation becomes confrontational," he said. "Calling for an arrest over flowers, without de-escalation, puts you in violation." The deputy pulled a body cam from his vest and activated it. "For documentation," he said. Cheryl's face turned the color of raw cement. "I didn't know who he was," she whispered. Ray handed the bylaws to the deputy. "Doesn't matter. She still tried to have me arrested in front of my family." The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was reckoning-shaped. And it was just getting started. Chief Raymond Carver didn't make a single phone call that night. He didn't storm into the HOA office or flash his badge at a town council meeting. He didn't argue online, didn't drop titles, and didn't threaten lawsuits. He went home, changed out of uniform, poured himself a beer, and sat on Lena's porch with the HOA bylaws spread across the table like a crime scene. Lena sat across from him, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Her hands were still stained with potting soil, but the adrenaline had finally worn off, and now what remained was disbelief. They really tried to have you arrested over a flower bed. Ray didn't respond right away. He flipped another page. No, they tried to humiliate me to make a point. Arrest was just the part they thought would go viral. She reached for her laptop, opened the community portal, and clicked through the tabs. There it was, Policy 4B, Grounds Preservation Clause. A vague block of text, giving the board the right to intervene if any landscaping action was deemed in conflict with neighborhood aesthetics or seasonal scheduling. No definition of aesthetics, no schedule posted, no accountability. They wrote it so they could interpret it however they want, Lena muttered. Ray nodded. Ambiguity is power in places like this, but once you shine a light on it, you take it away. They spent the next hour cross-referencing bylaws with email logs. Lena pulled up HOA newsletters going back 2 years. She had everything. Cheryl's write-ups, meeting recaps, screenshots of community alerts sent without timestamps, violation notices that never referenced specific policies. By the time midnight hit, Ray had assembled a list of 11 patterns, 5 violations issued to residents who'd spoken against the board publicly, 3 complaints filed against renters or unmarried homeowners, 2 contradictory policy statements regarding paint trim colors, 1 recorded instance of a board member threatening to report someone for attitude. Ray leaned back and tapped the table with the tip of his pen. They've been manufacturing compliance, using fear, not fairness. So what do we do? Lena asked. Take it to the city. City won't touch it until we prove it's systemic, patterned, biased. And once it hits that threshold, he flipped open his phone and showed her a contact. Evelyn Hart, legal advisor, State Ethics Oversight Committee. Evelyn helped me investigate a housing abuse case in Glenhurst 3 years ago. Different zip code, same stunt. The HOA there fined a widow $1,200 for a garden statue they said was distracting. What happened? They dissolved the board. Public vote. Lena's eyebrows lifted. We can do that. We can do more than that. Over the next week, they built what Ray called a compliance audit. Not an attack, a mirror. They reached out to neighbors, not with accusations, but questions. Lena knocked on doors, asked about past complaints, gathered stories. She listened to everything. No recording devices, no pressure. Just empathy, and the stories poured in. A father fined twice in 1 week for bike ramp obstructions, after filing a noise complaint against a board member's dog. A single woman told to take down her welcome wreath for being too large, though the exact same wreath appeared in 6 other homes on the street. An elderly couple written up for their front step planter, the same planter the board had gifted them a year earlier during a holiday raffle. Ray took notes, compiled them, and then called in Evelyn. When she arrived, Evelyn didn't walk into the clubhouse with a legal pad and a threat. She met with residents at Lena's house, off record, one-on-one. She didn't need outrage. She needed documentation, and now, they had it. Ray's plan was quiet by design. Lena posted nothing online. No hashtags, no clips, no photos of the SUV or the confrontation. They didn't need to win hearts. They needed to win structure. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about removal, and the only way to beat an HOA that abuses its own rules is to weaponize their rules against them. By the end of the second week, they had 20 resident testimonials, 3 conflicting policy statements, and a proposed ethics violation filing with the Oversight Committee, all signed, all time-stamped, all cross-referenced. Ray sat on the porch again, flipping through the folder, while Lena watered the garden. You really think we can take them down? She asked. He closed the folder gently. They tried to arrest a police chief over zinnias. They built their kingdom on fear. But now we've got a blueprint of every crack in the walls. He looked up. It's not if, it's when. The moment Cheryl Dunlap realized she no longer controlled the room came halfway through her opening statement. She stood at the front of the Oak Hollow Estates Community Clubhouse, arms folded behind her back, reading from a prepared script like she always did. Her tone was crisp, measured, performed. As always, our goal is to preserve the beauty, order, and shared values of our neighborhood. But no one was nodding. No one was writing anything down. No one was even looking at her. They were looking at the man standing in the back corner, flipping through a binder thick with documentation. Chief Raymond Carver wasn't in uniform this time. He didn't need to be. The crowd was bigger than usual, not just the same 10 retirees who showed up for every speed bump proposal. Tonight, the room was full. Families with strollers, teens in hoodies, working parents with tired eyes and folded arms. Word had spread, and most of it came from Lena, not the chief. She'd spent the last 2 weeks walking this neighborhood with a purpose, asking questions, handing out one-page summaries of their findings, inviting people to tonight's meeting with a calm voice and a simple question: do you know what's actually in your HOA rules? Turns out, most of them didn't, but they came to find out. When Cheryl finished her speech and opened the floor for questions, Ray raised a hand. She hesitated, but what choice did she have? You may speak, she said, tight-lipped. He didn't walk to the front. He didn't need the podium. He stayed in the back where everyone could see him clearly, and opened the binder. I'd like to start by addressing the complaint issued against my niece 2 weeks ago. We're not discussing private violations in a public forum, Cheryl said quickly. It wasn't private. You called law enforcement. You staged it on a Saturday morning in front of residents. And now that we're all here, we're going to talk about it. Cheryl shifted uncomfortably. That incident was handled per board authority under grounds interference policy. Let me stop you right there, Ray cut in, flipping a page. Section 4B of the grounds interference policy is undefined in the charter. There is no written schedule, no design template, no board-approved document that supports your version of enforcement, which means you escalated over a rule that doesn't actually exist. A murmur rippled through the room. He turned the binder around and held it open toward the crowd. We cross-checked 10 years of emails, newsletters, and announcements. Not once has Section 4B been properly outlined, revised, or approved by community vote. It's not a policy, it's a scarecrow. Cheryl opened her mouth, but another hand went up. It was Ethan Carver, Lena's neighbor. The man whose trash bin had once been used to frame Darren in another neighborhood, and who had followed this story with growing interest. My daughter was told she couldn't paint a chalkboard wall in our garage last year. Inside the garage, I've looked, there's nothing in the charter about that either. Because there isn't, Ray said, and he's not the only one. He tapped a sheet and began reading. Resident #4 fined for solar garden lights. Resident #7, cited for a fall wreath 2 weeks before Halloween. Resident #11, an elderly couple, ordered to remove a bench swing from their porch after living here for 12 years. Gasps, then quiet fury. We brought these to the State Ethics Oversight Committee, Ray said. They didn't just flag the charter, they flagged the board. Cheryl's voice cracked as she tried to interrupt. These accusations are without basis. They're signed by your own residents, he said, with timestamps, screenshots, copies of conflicting violation language. We didn't fabricate anything. We just finally looked close enough to see what you were doing. The crowd shifted again. Someone clapped. Another person followed. Then the room gave in. Applause, not explosive, not theatrical, but strong enough to make Cheryl step back from the podium, like it had bitten her. Lena stood then, binder in her arms, voice steady. This isn't a witch hunt. This is a correction. We're not asking for heads. We're asking for accountability. This neighborhood doesn't belong to the board. It belongs to the people who live in it. She turned to Cheryl directly. You tried to turn my uncle into an example. You ended up showing the whole street exactly how far you'd go to keep control. There was no dramatic exit. Cheryl didn't faint. She didn't confess. She just stood there, red-faced, silent, and suddenly very alone. 3 days after the meeting, a new email blast went out from the Oak Hollow HOA subject line. Important clarification on recent allegations. It came from the board's shared inbox, signed not by Cheryl Dunlap, but by the executive committee. The message was long, stuffed with vague language and legal fluff. It claimed inaccuracies were being circulated, accused unnamed residents of spreading misinformation, and warned against public recordings of private meetings without written consent. But it never once mentioned the flower bed, or the attempted arrest, or the binder full of documented policy abuse that had been read aloud to a roomful of homeowners. It was Cheryl's voice behind the keyboard, but this time, she was hiding behind a faceless committee signature, hoping no one would call her out by name. She was wrong. Lena read the email 3 times, then she picked up her phone and called her uncle. "They're doubling down," she said. "They're trying to make it sound like we doctored everything. They know they've already lost," Ray replied. "That's why they're trying to confuse the ending. So what do? We let them finish digging." That night, Cheryl made her biggest mistake yet. She sent a second email. This time, it was directed to the HOA's legal contractor, a small firm the board had used for years to rubber stamp violation notices and send threatening letters when fines went unpaid. But Cheryl didn't realize that the firm's junior associate, Mallory Fields, had just joined the neighborhood herself, and Mallory had been sitting in the crowd during the last meeting. She'd heard the binder, she'd watched Cheryl crumble. So when Cheryl requested a cease and desist letter addressed to Chief Raymond Carver for unlawful harassment and interference with HOA operations, Mallory flagged the email. Then she forwarded it, first to her firm's senior partner, then to Ray. The next morning, Ray received the forwarded message with a short note at the top. "Figured you'd want to see what she's trying to do. I live 4 doors down from you. I'm not going to be part of this." He read the draft letter Cheryl had requested. It accused him of impersonating law enforcement, misrepresenting HOA bylaws to residents, and inciting mass confusion during a peaceful meeting. It wasn't just desperate, it was defamatory, and it was provable. Ray didn't rage. He forwarded it to Evelyn Hart at the State Ethics Oversight Committee. She didn't rage either. She just opened a new folder titled Dunlap, Abuse of Legal Process. By the end of the week, Cheryl's misstep was public. Mallory's firm formally declined to represent the HOA going forward. They released a public statement clarifying that they had no intention of participating in a pattern of retaliatory or unethical legal threats. Elise, the board secretary, resigned that same afternoon. 2 more members followed her out within 24 hours. Lena posted nothing online. She didn't have to. Neighbors began doing it for her. Screenshots of the emails, side-by-sides of the policies, quotes from Ray's speech at the meeting, turned into Instagram posts with hashtags like #Zinnias and Justice and #KnowYourChief. A local journalist called it the polite revolt of Oak Hollow. It wasn't angry, it was strategic and devastating. At the next scheduled HOA meeting, Cheryl showed up 15 minutes late. She wore sunglasses indoors and didn't speak until the room forced her to. The silence after her arrival wasn't polite, it was suffocating. People sat in folding chairs with binders of their own now. Everyone had highlighted sections, everyone had questions, and this time, no one waited to be called on. Ethan stood and handed Cheryl a formal petition. It had 63 signatures. "This is a motion for a full recall vote. No more committees, no more stalling. We're not asking for change. We're implementing it." Cheryl didn't reach for the paper. She just stared at it like it was a resignation letter written in someone else's hand. "You don't have authority, actually," Ethan said, pulling out the charter. "We do. Page 29, subsection C. Community recall requires 30% of homeowner signatures. We brought 50%. Lena stood next. You tried to frame my uncle. Then you tried to bury it. You hid behind policies and titles and legal threats. But you forgot who this neighborhood actually belongs to. She turned to the crowd. It's ours now. Cheryl stood for a moment longer, motionless. Then she walked out of the clubhouse, said nothing, and never returned. Not to a meeting, not to her position, and within a month, not even to her house. The day after the board was dissolved, someone ripped the No UN Scheduled Modifications banner off the community bulletin board. No one claimed responsibility. The fabric fluttered for a while, tangled around the pushpins, before someone quietly folded it and left it on the clubhouse porch. It stayed there for a week before disappearing entirely. Nobody bothered to re-hang it. The neighborhood didn't need a symbol of control anymore. They had watched it fall apart piece by piece. Inside the HOA office, the changes were even more obvious. The oversized desk that once served as Cheryl Dunlap's command center had been stripped clean. The drawers sat open, empty. The printer was unplugged. The rulebooks, previously stacked in color-coded piles, had been boxed and moved to a corner. The new interim committee didn't want them on display. They weren't starting with edits. They were starting from scratch. Lena attended the first open policy forum wearing jeans and a gray hoodie. She didn't speak during the first half of the meeting. She just listened. Most people weren't used to that yet. They expected her to lead, but she wasn't there to take over. She had done what needed to be done. Now her presence was a quiet signal that it was safe to speak, and people did. One woman talked about being fined for keeping a rocking chair on her porch. Another man brought photos of his child's swing set, which had been labeled an obstruction. A couple who'd stayed silent during Cheryl's reign finally admitted they had considered moving, twice. The atmosphere was different now. No tension, no side eyes, no one calculating whether a complaint might come back to bite them. There were no whispers, just voices that had been waiting to be heard. Chief Ray Carver showed up late, dressed in plain clothes, but he didn't sit in the back like usual. He stood near the entrance, arms crossed, nodding as each resident spoke. He wasn't trying to intimidate anyone. He was just making it clear that people were watching, and they weren't watching out of fear anymore. When someone asked about creating a formal appeals process, Ray spoke for the first time. Don't just create it, make it accessible. If someone gets fined, they should know exactly how to contest it, step by step, without needing to call in a lawyer or beg for forgiveness. That idea made it into the next draft of the charter. In less than 2 weeks, the interim committee had posted their first real update. It wasn't flashy, just a clean 2-page summary of what had been removed and what was being rewritten. No jargon, no posturing, just clarity. The final section read, "This association exists to serve its residents, not to police them." The message was clear. The rules weren't the problem. The way they had been used was. Ray spent more time at Lena's now. He didn't talk much about the old board. He didn't need to. Every time they passed the old HOA office or walked Max down the sidewalk, they saw the shift. Neighbors used to look away. Now they stopped to talk. Some just waved. Others offered updates. Small things like, "Got my flag approved today, with no hassle," or "Finally got my front porch light fixed without a citation." It wasn't celebration, it was stability, and for Ray, that was the real win. One afternoon, Ray received a letter in the mail from the County Housing Advisory Council. Inside was a formal acknowledgement of the oversight complaint he and Lena had filed. The state committee had officially flagged Oak Hollow's old board for procedural misconduct and intentional misrepresentation of authority. It was a quiet bureaucratic victory, but it meant the story had made it all the way up the chain. That meant protection for the future, and it meant what they had done wasn't just local noise. It mattered. Ray folded the letter and placed it in a manila envelope marked "Resolved." He didn't frame it. He didn't post about it. He just added it to the folder and left it on Lena's desk, beneath her garden journal. The neighborhood newsletter returned the following week. The layout was the same, but the voice wasn't. Instead of rule reminders, it opened with a spotlight on local kids who had helped clean up the park. The second page included a thank you to residents who contributed to the new community compost plan. No scare language, no veiled threats, just people talking to people. The final line read, "Thank you for helping rebuild trust, one neighbor at a time." That night, Lena sat on the porch watching the streetlights flicker on. Max lay curled at her feet, head twitching with dreams. Across the road, a group of teenagers biked past laughing, one of them carrying a bag of sidewalk chalk. A year ago, Cheryl might have sent a warning for that. Graffiti risk, visual clutter, some invented reason to keep the street looking exactly as she saw it in her head. Now, Lena hoped they'd write something bright. The last draft of the new charter was printed on recycled paper, double-spaced, with every section numbered and cross-referenced. It didn't look impressive. It wasn't bound in leather or embossed with a gold seal. But when Lena turned to the final page and read the signatures, it felt more permanent than anything the old board had ever written. For the first time in Oak Hollow's history, every homeowner had been invited to vote on the document, and this time, they actually had. The final clause wasn't about enforcement, it was about responsibility. It stated that no rule could be enforced unless it was publicly visible, clearly explained, and approved by a majority of residents. That clause hadn't come from a committee, it came from Ray, and it stayed in the charter because no one could argue with it. Not after what had happened. Ray never took a seat on the new board. He never needed to. He was the reason it existed in the first place, but he never treated that like a title, just a chapter. And once it was finished, he let it close. Most days he could be found under the oak tree in Lena's backyard, helping build a chicken coop she wasn't even sure she wanted. Max kept trying to eat the measuring tape, and neither of them stopped him. There was no reason to rush anything now. The only deadline they cared about was sunset. One afternoon, a young couple from down the street stopped by with a welcome basket. They'd just bought the house 3 doors down, the same one Cheryl used to own. They didn't know who Cheryl was, didn't know about the attempted arrest, or the staged citations, or the years of tension that had once ruled this block. All they saw was a quiet street, blooming flowers, and a handwritten sign near the clubhouse that said Neighborhood Open Forum, all residents welcome. The woman smiled when she saw Ray. "You're the police chief, right? I think my dad used to work with you." Ray smiled back and shook her hand. "I've been called worse." Lena didn't explain the history. She didn't need to. The fact that the couple felt safe here said everything that needed to be said. The fear was gone. The structure held, and the future had no idea how close it had come to being something entirely different. The following weekend, someone painted a small mural on the side of the clubhouse. It wasn't elaborate, just a row of sunflowers, with the words "homegrown together" stenciled underneath. No one filed a complaint, no one asked for permission, no one even claimed credit, and no one removed it. Because some things belong to everyone. Later that evening, Lena and Ray sat on the porch, legs stretched out, drinks in hand. They didn't talk about the old board, or the binder, or the moment the deputy stepped out of that black SUV and turned the entire street into a witness stand. That part of the story was already over. Now they talked about compost, and chicken wire, and whether or not Max had secretly buried the garden gloves again. The drama was done. What remained was peace, and the kind of quiet that meant something had truly been rebuilt, not in defiance, but with care.